think I told about joining the Young People's Club, and after we came back from Sweden, and when we came back, I went back to North Park, and then in 1938, February 1938, I graduated from North Park, so that was the middle of the year again, and I decided that I wanted to go on for 2 years at National College of Education, but I didn't want to start at mid-semester again. But while I was at North Park, I had a classmate whose father had just taken a new position. He was starting an office downtown in Chicago, getting ready for the tercentenary of the coming of the Swedes to America. He was in charge of their office for the activities that were going to happen in Chicago. And since I had been to Sweden and handled Swedish well now, both his daughter and I were hired in that office. So I worked there from February until September, when I was going to go to, or till that summer when the celebration happened. So it gave me a nice job and an income so that I'd have something to start national. So it was an interesting time because I really learned, I didn't know anything about this 300-year, the fact that 300 years before Sweden had established a colony in the United States. But when September came, then I entered national, and that first day standing in line registering, there were 3 of us together, and we became friends, and we stayed friends for the whole time we were at national. And Ruth Sperduto was one of them. Of course, she became a lifetime friend. And Betty, I can't think of Betty's last name right now, and then Elizabeth, we 3 became friends for the whole time we were there. At any rate, the day that I came home, that first day that I registered, I came home and all of a sudden I realized something was terribly wrong. The night before, my aunt and uncle had come home from a fishing trip, my Aunt Elsie and my Uncle Arthur. And my mom and dad were out. I don't know where they were visiting somebody. So I was home alone, and Uncle Arthur came over and asked if I would call the doctor because my aunt wasn't feeling well. So the doctor came, and he said, well, she's got congestion, what do you call it when your stomach is?
Upset stomach?
Indigestion.
What?
Indigestion.
Indigestion. He called it indigestion. And I don't know what he gave her. But the next morning, they had to call the doctor again. And when I came home to find them going to the funeral home. My aunt had died. The doctor had not recognized a heart attack. If you can imagine that they were that stupid that he didn't realize that she didn't have indigestion, she had a heart attack. So here Harv was only 14 years old and left without a mother. It really was a very sad time. Eventually, you know, Harv would love to have come to stay with us because just to be there with his dad wasn't much fun. But we really didn't have room at our house, and I don't think Uncle Arthur would have allowed it anyway. He finally remarried, and he married a very nice woman, but you know, it wasn't the same for Harv. It was really hard on him. Well, in 1940, I graduated from National, and luckily got a job right away, and the job was in New Buffalo, Michigan. So in September, Betty one of the gals that I'd been with all this time, she and I both got jobs there. She got the kindergarten job and I got the first grade job. And I came there to take over a classroom of 42 first graders. Yeah. And the nice part was that there was no music teacher, there was no Phi Ed teacher, there was no special teacher at all. And in this group of 42, I had 2 or 3 little boys who were still talking baby talk. They really had speech problems, and of course we had no speech teacher. So how they ever survived that year, I have no idea. And as a brand new teacher, I didn't know what I was doing anyway, so I was practicing on them. That was an awful situation. Why, you know, but that was the Depression, and that wasn't anything else they could do about it. Still, I kept in touch with many of those kids for a long time. Many years afterward, I came home one time, and Daddy said, "Oh, you had a phone call from a former boyfriend." I said, "Former boyfriend? Who are you talking about?" And he told me the name. It was one of my first graders that I'd had that first year. His mother had just died, and he was going through her things, and he found letters that his mother and we had corresponded after I left New Buffalo. I corresponded with several of those families. They were so nice. But let's see, this was 40, and it must have been 1941. That first year, after I'd been there for a year, Daddy and I were engaged because he was going to be called up into the service. It was before the war had started, but the war had started already in Europe. And so the fellows were all being drafted, and Daddy was being drafted, and we became engaged just a couple of days before he was drafted. Luckily, he was sent to Chanute Field, which was in Illinois. I was still teaching in New Buffalo, and I came home every weekend. One of the teachers close by had a car, and she was driving to Chicago every weekend, and we got to ride along with her. And Daddy would take the train up from Rantoul, so we'd meet on weekends in Chicago until December. And on December, what was it, the 10th? When was Pearl Harbor? December 7th. December 7th. Both of us, it was a Sunday, we were both home, and Daddy called, and he said, "Have you been listening to the radio?" And we hadn't. And then he told us that Pearl Harbor had been, what had happened in Pearl Harbor. And I didn't believe him. I didn't think he was telling the truth. That couldn't be happening. But he said, "I've got to leave immediately. I have to get back to the base." We're all called back. When he came to Chanute Field, he said there were guns in place that he had never seen before. And his papers were stamped for the duration. He was supposed to have been in for 1 year, but now everything was stamped for the duration.
Wow.